everyone, welcome to Poetry and Talk. Poetry and Talk is a new online interviewing platform for poets to share their poetry, background, and inspiration. We're so grateful that you're watching today. We have a new guest poet to introduce you to. Please stay connected with us on social media, on our Facebook page, Poetry and Talk. We have several poet interviews we've uploaded, and we hope that you've had a moment to watch them, and we hope that you're enjoying viewing them. I'm Leslie Sue, the host for Poetry and Talk. Before we get into our guest poet, if you are a poet and you'd like to have an interview with us, you can send an email to us at poetryandtalk@gmail.com, and we'll get back to you with scheduling and information. Thank you again, everyone, for tuning in with us. I'd like to welcome our guest poet for today, Gary Hitching. Hi, Gary. How are you?
Hi. Good to be here.
Thank you so much for being here. So excited to find out all about you and your poetry. We like to open up with a little bit of a brief intro into a poem that you're going to read for us. So if you're all set.
Okay, so I spent 26 years in the military, and my poems have helped me through a number of occasions and things like that. I've used poetry from the age of 16 to help my mental health issues all the way through my life. And I write a poem a day, every day, and publish it. But I spent, as I said, I spent a lot of time in the military. I spent a lot of time also in war zones, and not just the European wars and the Afghan wars, but Syria and places like that as well. So Remembrance Sunday, which is this Sunday coming in the UK, is a big thing for us. And so we celebrate and use the poppy as our remembrance. So my poem is about Remembrance Sunday. Would you like me to say it now?
Yes, please.
So, okay. You know they're dead when the fields are red and the children don't cry anymore. You know they're dead when the fields are red and democracy comes knocking at your door. You know they're dead when the fields are red and nobody remembers the war. You know they're dead when the fields are red, when money shakers are waiting on the floor. You know they're dead when the fields are red and life has no meaning anymore. You know you're dead when the fields aren't red and silence is the focus and the core. You know you're dead when the fields aren't red and nothing changes. It's the same as before.
That's beautiful and very, very deep, very reflective of some of the things that you've experienced. Can you go ahead and share with us some of these things and elaborate a little more on the poetry?
So, all of my poetry rhymes, which I find helps me, find the words that I need and the circumstances that I need, and also takes me away from the actual pain of the moment that I was in. So, my book, which is due out in the end of this month, the start of next month, it's a little bit delayed due to COVID, but that's called Run, They Said, and that's my biography in poetry from when I first joined the Air Force to when I left the Air Force, and the 9 wars that I was involved in during that time. Some of them, were more horrific than the others. A lot of them, the things that I saw wasn't published on the news and wasn't, in the general view of the public. So my experiences on paper were sometimes placed with a little bit of humor into them, so I could deal with that subject at the time. But generally, my poetry, like I say, rhymes and follows, like I call it the bathtub effect. It starts off quite morose, it ends up worse. Well, so it's the middle bit's worse, and then it brings you out on the other side quite happy. So that just helps your mental state, and also helps you to deal with the things that you've seen and gone through.
Wow, that's really fascinating. It's almost like it's this kind of dark cloud and it's kind of murky, and you're kind of getting into the process And then as the process unfolds and continues, it starts to get clearer and clearer. The clouds seem to dissipate, and then the sun comes out, so to speak. Is that kind of reflective of
That's right. Yeah, I try, and every part of my poem, needs to get over the emotion that I'm feeling, but also needs to get towards the end of the poem needs to also state that I'm still here and life is still worth living, and so it should still carry on through different words and through rhyme, because rhyme, like song, is such an important part of happiness.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. When you were you also writing poetry, Gary?
Sorry, I missed what you said there.
Yes. When you were in the Air Force, were you writing poetry then as well?
Yeah, I used to have a little book with me when every time I went out on active duty or what have you, and I would write then everything that I felt. Some of which, wouldn't make particular sense, but then would be grouped together later on as one poem. So thoughts and feelings, and usually a poem for me would be triggered by somebody's sentence, like wording or things like that, or something that I saw. So with the fields are red, the one that the poem that I've just spoke about, it says that there's money shakers on the floor. So they're the people that obviously have the little red jars that shake the money at the supermarkets, for you to put your donations in. And so the sound of the shaking there would reminds me of guns and things like that. And so therefore, I was able to bring that into poetry, but put it into a way that people may understand, and that's kind of how I go. A lot of people aren't familiar with war, especially in the Western cultures, and so haven't really been in conflict and have only experienced it through either media or through small amounts of parts of violence within their towns and cities. But when you're fully involved in any of it, you have to try and explain something to somebody that has no understanding with ease, finding something that is a common interest. And that's what I do with with my poetry. The fields are red, to them that could be a field of poppies. To me it was a field of blood. But do you know what I mean? It's up to your interpretation, how you think. Is it a field of poppies or is it a field of blood? And that's kind of how I deal. So you could read the poem once and have one idea, and then read it again and have a completely different idea to what it means. That's the kind of way I go.
Mm-hmm. So your poetry is giving us an inside view into all your experiences with the Air Force that, for many of us, we really don't have any point of reference, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I mean that's just one part. Obviously, I write daily, so all kinds of things. This year has been for me. I mean, it's horrendous. Everything that's going on, and the restrictions and the deaths and things are terrible. But to me, it's been very easy to write because of there's so many feelings around and so much news going on. Not just have we had the COVID, we've had elections here. You've got elections over in America now, and also take a knee for the Black rights movements and things like that, which has affected the UK as well. And all of these things get put into poetry for me, to how I understand them and how I feel about them, but without being one track minded, to see an open view. And again, you can read a poem once and it would mean one thing, and you can read a poem again and it would mean another. But generally all of my poems are as they happen, so people can see something on the news and then read about it in poetry. So they can interpret what they see on the news as horrific, then read it in poetry, where it's bad to start off with, gets worse, and then brings you out the other side. And that's kind of how I do. I'm very interested in mental health and psychology and the effects of poetry against that.
Mm-hmm. And how has poetry been a healing force for you specifically?
So obviously seeing what I saw when I was in the military and various other experiences that I've had throughout my life, I have suffered and been under medical kind of supervision for PTSD. which, seeing so many traumatic things within the Gulf War and the Afghan War, you would be. But I found that writing them down and trying to explain to people what I saw and what the goodness was that came out of what I saw, then helped my healing process and has helped others as well.
Mm-hmm. And Gary, you mentioned that you write every single day.
That's right, yeah, every single day, and post every day. So I posted it on my page on Facebook every day, and yeah, and now that's a year in now. Well, a year, more than a year. 380 poems. So 380 days in we are now. I set myself a challenge October last year to see if I could publish a poem every day. I've written every day for a long time, but like I say, some of them weren't finished, some of them were disjointed, and they would all go to make one. But to do one every single day using current affairs as my as my inspiration, I thought, well, I'll try that. But I didn't realize, obviously, that we were going to have COVID-19, 2 elections, and the Black movement happening as well. So, inspirationally, this year has been amazing to do it. The test will come when all of that goes, and hopefully next year we have like a grey year and not so much of an exciting twisted turny year. So
yes. Let me ask you, when you're writing your poetry, we have a great understanding of the different subject matters that you write about. Now, when you're actually in the creative process itself, is it a process for you where you start to with all the emotions and the different feelings that you're kind of like feeling your way into it, and that's part of the completion of the poem? Or do you come into it with kind of a set, so to speak, of how you already feel, and it's kind of set in a way, and then you're just going to express it through words and through poetry? Or is it something completely different?
it's really completely different, to be honest. So it's set, during the day, it would be set off through something that I saw, a statement that I've heard, or something like that, and I would love to say it takes me hours and hours to write it, and I sit and I think about everything I write. But I suppose I'm very lucky in a way that when I have the inspiration, I'll write the poem and it'll be done in 5 minutes. I'll then look back at it again, half an hour later or an hour later, or when I've got 5 minutes to myself, just to check that it all works, and then change some words around, and then it's done. So I would say probably, in all, about 15 minutes a day, which is, I would love to say that it took me a long time to do it, because then I would feel justified. But no, I seem to be able to already have the words in my head, and the feelings seem to come out onto paper very easily for me.
Okay, so it sounds like it's pretty much an effortless process.
Does seem that way, although some days, on no news days, I have to kind of think about, what's going to happen, what we're doing today, and then it would be generally about my life and, what I'm going through, and am I having dark feelings today about my past, and then I would do that. So generally I would try to use current affairs and what's going on and the general feel of everybody, because it's quite a big page now. I think there's 1,500 followers I have on my Facebook page at the moment, which I'm very pleased about. But so I have to have something that they all relate to. But then when I can't find anything in the news or anything like that, yeah, I do like think about myself and how I'm feeling and how I've got over that issue, and then I'll write that down as well. And some of the feedback I get, is just truly amazing. People, look at the poems, and then they can read through the poems, and then they say how much it helped them. And if that's the case, that's fantastic. That's exactly what I want.
Mm-hmm, absolutely, that's wonderful. Talk to me about words. As a poet, words can be really fascinating to us. Just the word itself, what it conveys, how we feel about it, what we're aiming to express, whatever the subject matter is. Sometimes we pair words, whether it's something that we heard someone say or something that comes to us, something that we read. So share with me, if you would, and with the viewers, words. What is your relationship with words? How do you relate to words? Because that's really like our vehicle.
Yeah, well, I'm constantly learning about words. I mean, the English language, as you know, is like relentless in the amount of words that are there. There are 17 or 18 different words for one word. You know, pick up a thesaurus, and one word will be in there, and there'll be 20 other words that mean exactly the same. So I'm learning constantly, and I love when I find a new word. You know, I found one. Not so long ago, and it was vilify, and I thought, wow, what an amazing word. It's such, and then you think, you know, I think straight away, because all of my poetry rhymes, there's not one that doesn't rhyme. And then I think, what does vilify mean? And then so I look up what it means, and then I think, well, what does it rhyme with? How can that go with that word? You know, and then I marry the two together, and then it will go into my memory bank there, and then they'll be used for later things. But some words in the English language are used an awful lot, and so I try not to use them. I try and think of words that everybody could understand, because they're linked in a way of rhyme, but also to make people think as well. You know, because you know it's not just me that maybe didn't know that word; it may be other people that didn't know that word as well. And now we have the amazing internet, which is fantastic. You can just type away, find out what the word means, and then you know off you go again. But also when you're struggling to find words, especially words that rhyme, and you want to get over a certain point, you know, the trying to find a word that would rhyme and keep you in the same context is quite hard. So then you would use your bank of easy words to remember and things like that, which is what I do. You know, I've got a bank of words where I can always pop in, you know, which would help me out, which would lengthen my poem a little bit more, but still keep me on context. It's you know, words, like you say, words to a poet are our tools, and you know, but used wrongly, they would go completely against us. And so, you know, I'm very respectful of the words, and also very respectful of the fact that many English words have double meanings, and also many words in English are completely different in American or in Europe and places like that. You know, because you know, to us, I have to think about, you know, the words that we would say. Like if I was to write about a zucchini, in England we don't have zucchinis, we have courgettes, you know. But if I wrote a poem and it went out to America and it said courgette, nobody would know what that meant. As the same in England, if I wrote zucchini, nobody would actually know what that meant either. So I have to be quite careful that my words are able to be interpreted throughout English-speaking nations, and also for nations that aren't English-speaking as well. And they're able to pick these words up in normal dictionaries, in smaller dictionaries, not so much the big Oxford ones, the smaller ones that are available abroad, especially in countries like Afghanistan, Iraq, and the Stans, where their command of the English language isn't as good as Europe.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's really interesting. And with your interest in current affairs, all that you experienced with the military, and kind of pulling that together, you take that into consideration with your poetry, and you're kind of thinking about who the viewers are that are going to be reading it, and from the different countries and the different places around the globe. So you actually include them so that they will also have a frame of reference as well.
That's right, because you know, when you start a platform, especially on Facebook, you know, Facebook is quite an old thing for us in Europe and in America, but in developing countries like Africa, it's new, it's very new, and you'll be amazed how many poets are in Africa, and especially in Pakistan and India. You know, Facebook's a massive thing out there still. They haven't kind of moved on to the Instagrams and the things like that yet. They've still, you know, still going through the stage that we went through 5 or 6 years ago, and then, you know, and they would love to be poets. Some of them, you know, are very good, amazing, but the majority at the moment are still learning their language as well. And you know, if you're able to like put something on to their page, but that you're writing, it would encourage them to know that, you know, it's okay to do that. It's okay to jumble your words around, as long as the whole thing makes sense. You know, obviously, you know, they most of them would only understand rhyme in poetry. They wouldn't understand prose and other things like that, because to them in the developing countries, they're taught poetry as a rhyming literacy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Gary, can you take us back a little bit to when you first wrote poetry? Because you started to write at a very young age. So when you first started to write poetry, those first couple of initial years. What did you write about?
Well, I was 16 years old when I joined the Air Force, and I was very unclear about what my sexuality was at that time. And there was always lots of things going on in my mind, and I'd like to call it kind of like my devil and my angel. There was one thing telling me to do one thing and one thing telling me to do the other. But unfortunately for me, at the time, I only had one choice. It was gay. It was illegal to be gay in the military in the UK until 2002, which it was the same in America. It was don't ask, don't tell for a long, long time. And so you couldn't do anything. But it was at the age of 16 that I started to realise that I was perhaps homosexual rather than straight. So so it was very easy for me to, instead of telling anybody, knowing that I would lose my job, it was very easy for me to write about my feelings and place them in a lockable book. And so therefore I felt like I was telling my book, which was therefore like telling my family, telling my little book there. And that's what I did. I wrote all of my feelings for years and years and years in a book, and nobody knew about them. And it's only now that I'm starting to reopen them and have a look at them again. And they helped me through an awful hard time in my life.
Mm-hmm. And did you come upon poetry yourself? Did you have a family member, a friend, a neighbor, someone in the military that was also in poetry?
No, I mean, we taught it at school, so, and I'd only just finished school at 16, so we'd just passed my exams and things like that. So it was still quite fresh in my mind. And when we were taught it at school, we're not just taught prose and rhyming poetry, and we were taught all different kinds of poetry. So we knew that, how to write it. And so when writing it at school, I found it very easy to do. And so it was something that I took to very quickly, and then realized that obviously when I was having trouble, as you do when you grow up, when you're in your 14, 15 and 16th year, if you can't tell anybody, it's very easy to write it down. And then by writing it down and reading it back to yourself, you can see if it's a real problem or just one of your little phases. And so from a very young age, I was able to just write it down to see what kind of problem it was and then put it right myself.
Mm-hmm. I'm interested to ask you, Gary, do you think that there's a certain type of person who is gravitates towards writing poetry, or do you think that's just a generalization?
No, I think you've got to be quite extrovert. You've got to kind of wear your heart on your sleeve, and you've got to be, even though you're private, you've got to be quite open, because by writing poetry, it's an inner feeling, whether it's about your actual feelings or not. It still shows what type of person you are from how you perceive things through writing. So, so many people can look at a tree and just see a tree, but a poet can look at a tree and see all the different textures and shapes and shadows of a tree, and so therefore straight away you're identifying yourself as different, which sometimes in this world it's not a good thing, sometimes it's very good.
Mm-hmm. Now what about someone who likes to read poetry but they're not a poet? What's your take on that? What do you think that they're trying to get out of poetry? What do you think gives them something when they read the poetry, but they're not actually a poet themselves, but they keep going back to read poetry? What's your take on what they're getting out of it?
Probably escapism, and they're willing to learn. If they can escape into a poem, you can escape into some really good poems and see what the poet sees. If you're in if you're in a war zone, if you're in Syria and everywhere's bombed, and you look out of your window and everywhere's grey and just and you can pick up a book, a poetry book, which talks about rivers and lakes and mountains and things like that, and straight away you can push yourself away from your situation. So escapism, I think, is a massive thing to do with reading poetry. And also, some people who aren't necessarily very literate with or have a huge scope of words can read poetry and actually see and understand what these words are better than if they were just written down on a piece of paper, because the words come alive with poetry, and they would describe themselves what they are, especially in a rhyme. A rhyme would show you that it's an easy way of learning, you know, different ways. And especially if you rhyme it with something that's got to be associated with, then you're never going to forget it. Things like that. You know, you ask a person in their 70s now to tell you a nursery rhyme that they was told as a child, and they could straight away do that because they put it into a rhyme. So you put poetry into a rhyme, it stays in your mind, and you can escape back to that at any time when things are good, bad, or indifferent.
Mm-hmm. Gary, we still have a few more minutes. What else would you like to share so we can learn a little bit more about your poetry, a little bit more about you?
Okay, so I've got a Facebook page called Poetry Daily Dose, and like I've said, you know, every day I write on there. So if you look through that, you can go all the way to the start and pick a day, you know, because I've done a whole year now. So you can pick your birthday and see what was going through my mind on your birthday. Generally, if it was between March and now, it's to do with COVID. So you know, or how hot it is, or things I don't know. But yes, the best thing for you to do is maybe nip onto my page, join it, because then you know, every day you'll get your poem, which is released generally in the morning, but sometimes can be all the way up until lunchtime, depending on what I'm doing. But yeah, daily the poetry will appear on there. But the best thing to do is to scroll right back, find your birthday, and read what I was going through on your birthday, and then go from there. You know, just randomly select days. You know, and there's a whole year on there now, so you can even go back. Instead of reading this year's, you can read last year's, because if this year's not going too well for you, you might want to reread from October last year. Especially in December last year, I wrote a Christmas poem every day, and that wasn't just about white Christmases and sleigh bells and things like that. It was about the homeless. It was about people not being able to pay their bills, and you know, and the other side of Christmas. So there's lots of different things, none of which is political. I try and stay straight down the line. From American politics and British politics, I try and stay straight down the line. Everybody gets a slate in. It's not just one person.
On the practical level, is there anything, Gary, that you'd like to share with poets that are watching and listening?
Yeah, really. I mean, it's just, you know, write what you feel. And if it doesn't make any sense, you know, just leave it on a piece of paper. And words have a way of kind of moving themselves together to make sense. You know, don't give up, keep going. You know, but if you've got some inspiration and it only starts off as a couple of lines, leave it on that page. And then eventually, when you have that inspiration again, you'll be able to go back to that page, and it's a good start. So I have a book full of many started poems, and which haven't been finished or haven't even got the bones to them, but I may have that feeling again, and so you know, they're all on my phone on the cloud, and if I put the titles of my poems are like how I felt, you know. So if I felt, I don't know, depressed, there'll be a poem if I write depression on there, and all the poems with depression will come up, and then it will say 4 of them are unfinished, and then I'll click on one of the 4 to see if it matches where I am at that time, and then I'm able to like either use them words, move them around and carry on, or take inspiration from how I felt then. But yeah, if you feel the need to write words down, write them down, and then eventually they'll turn into a poem. And every poem is good. It doesn't matter who thinks it's bad. If you think it's good, it's good.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We're going to need to wrap things up for today. Gary, this has been such a wonderful interview and very inspiring. I thank you for your time. And
You're welcome.
Back. You have your book, you said, coming out the end of November.
Yeah, it's due out end of this month, but it might be delayed a little bit because of COVID. It's called Run, They Said, and it's a biography in poetry, all rhyming, from the age of 16 to 40. It's my whole military career, and I did see some amazing things. I don't want to give too much away, but there are at least 10 wars within there. I visited every single one.
Mm-hmm. Well, we'll be on the lookout for that. Keep us posted. Thank you again for a great interview. We wish you much success with everything. Thank you, everyone, for watching Poetry and Talk today. Again, please stay connected with us on social media, on our Facebook page, Poetry and Talk. Thank you again to our guest poet, Gary, for the great interview. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you on the next Poetry and Talk. Until then, stay blessed and be well. Thank you.